Hello, welcome to Why Wait Till Sunday. I am Alfred, your host. We are reviewing the Week 14 slate where I did poorly. But I think we can learn from what we do wrong just as much from what we do right, probably more. So I still like to review. This helps me, go through my process, see where things went wrong. Let's talk about the misses first. Going through the quarterbacks we discussed, Justin Fields, there was no problem there. Kyle Trask, there was no problem there. They both, Fields did get to 40. Trask, high 30s. He was fine, well over 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, I believe. Ian Book was not played very much from what I could tell, but he was amazing. He had 5 touchdowns, I believe. I had 0. I wanted nothing to do with Book against Syracuse. I mean, the matchup was very, very soft, but I thought they'd run a lot. Instead, it was all Ian Book. I think he had 2 rushing and 3 passing touchdowns, something like that. Sam Ehlinger was pretty blah once again. They scored all their touchdowns on the ground. JT Daniels got postponed. Grayson McCall got postponed, at least for that game. Now, we talked about Jack Plummer. He was 7,900, and he came through well over 300 yards. He had 3 touchdowns, but he just didn't quite get to where you want him to get. No rushing. The rushing upside for these guys is so huge, and I think I need to reassess. My bar is like, okay, what's the likelihood this guy's going to get to 300 yards passing? Plummer felt very safe for 7,900, and he got there. But you kind of need, in the college game, I think you really need to think about 400 yards passing or 300 plus some rushing. 300 passing and no rushing just doesn't really get you there unless the guy's very, very inexpensive. Bailey Hockman, I had a decent amount of him. He had 300 yards passing, no touchdowns for the Wolfpack. That game in general just wasn't what I thought it would be. I actually thought the Wolfpack had the 4th highest team total on the slate. I really thought that they were an undervalued, I had even some stacks. And is one of those weird games. I mean, Hockman went over 300 yards for only 7,400, but no touchdowns. And in fact, I thought that game was going to be a sneaky shootout, and it went almost half the projected points. I mean, it was projected for 60 points. They only went for 36 points, I believe, something like that. So just total misread. Georgia Tech didn't even have 4 starting defensive linemen, I believe. I mean, I thought NC State would just have their way with them. Even if it was on the ground, they would just be able to just run all over them. They didn't even do that. I mean, it was just a very bizarre game. No offense really to speak of compared to what I expected. So that was very strange. Kind of just one of those things. I mean, I still don't know how to explain it. Jurkovec got scratched. He was 6,600, and we liked him against Virginia. His backup Grossel had 500 yards passing, which means Jurkovec would have probably been a good play. I played one Grossel when the news came out Jurkovec was not going to play, but we liked the Boston College quarterback. I just I shied away a little bit from Grossel because I just didn't know what to expect. I mean, I don't know the player very well, and ended up going to the next guy on the list, Jared Doege, who was terrible. I mean, for lack of a better word, I kind of like the matchup with Iowa State, and boy, he was useless from a fantasy perspective, and that was really bad. I mean, had I just gone to all Grossel, probably would have fared better. I ended up having a decent amount of Doege, and that was horrible. I mean, just horrible. The guy had 3 or 4 300-yard games. But again, I think that's why, I don't know, maybe just need to not think about a 300-yard game as anything too special, especially in the college game. I mean, this isn't the NFL. Guys go for 300 pretty regularly. You need 304, or you need like 400 yards, or you need, 300 and some potential on the ground. So these guys where you're hoping for 300 through the air and no rushing maybe become a good play that I'm not really excited about anymore. We talked about Will Howard for Kansas State. He ended up coming through. He was pretty good, 18 points, but he was only 5,300. So if you punted quarterback or the super flex, he actually came through for you. And those were the guys we talked about. Those were my targets. Really turned out, Jack Plummer just wasn't good enough for his price tag. And Hawkman was not good enough at all. Doege was terrible. Fields and Trask came through. But who I want to talk about in terms of a huge miss was Brennan Armstrong for Virginia. He was 8,200, and he challenged basically Trask and Fields. He got up to 37 points, I believe it was, and really was a member on a lot of teams that cashed, especially in double ups and even in tournaments. He was a consistent guy reviewing those lineups. Armstrong was in there, and it allowed you to take the savings, about 1,500 from Trask or Fields, and go down to Armstrong, and you could pump that 1,500 into something else. I want to give a shout out to @Dadino860. He's College Football Magic on Twitter. We were chatting over the weekend, and he said he thought that Boston College, Virginia was a sneaky shootout. And while I didn't hate that idea, obviously my sneaky shootout was NC State, Georgia Tech, which was very wrong. He was very, very right. And if you played a lot of guys from UVA, Boston College, you did well. That game had a 55 total, and it went way over 55. And UVA was projected for 31 points. So really the process would have been pretty good. NC State, who I liked a lot more than the Virginia players, had a 34 over team total, and UVA had 31. So they were comparable. The Boston College defense really isn't anything special. I think why I shied away from Armstrong is the Boston College, plays kind of slow. They, give up a decent amount on the ground, and Armstrong certainly does run the ball, but their passing volume is so low. They were one of the lowest attempts allowed on the slate in terms of passing, but Armstrong turned out to be fantastic. He almost pushed 300 yards. He had over 100 on the ground. He had I think 3-something touchdowns. He was great. I just missed it. 8,200 felt a little expensive for what I didn't think was an optimal matchup. Had he been in the sevens, I think I actually would have been all over him. I got to watch out for, it might've been just kind of like the price tag. Like I just saw the 8 and I kind of ruled out anyone in the 800s because there were a couple guys in the sevens that I liked, like Plummer and Hawkman. We're processing this right now in real time. I'm trying to figure out why Armstrong wasn't on my list. I know about the guy. I've got him in some C2C leagues. I'm aware of who he is, what he can do. I just think I missed the price tag in the 8s. I was either paying way up or I was going down into the 7s or even the 6s and kind of just missed that group of players. And I just didn't love the matchup. Boston College, like I said, their volume allowed was not huge. I usually try to search for teams that are allowing just a lot of plays, if nothing else, and that didn't come out for me. I missed Brennan Armstrong. I really kind of missed him. He turned out to be kind of a very nice play. But the savings, if you didn't have to have Trask, I was going Trask and Fields as my top quarterback. I definitely wanted one of those guys who could challenge for 40 points. But if you did Armstrong instead, that allowed for some money to go elsewhere. I found myself, and we'll talk about this at the end, going a lot of Jalen Hyatt for Tennessee. We talked about him. I thought it was a fantastic matchup. He ended up having 4 receptions, I believe it was. So that's pretty decent for a $3,700 receiver, but they only went for 10 yards. And, had I had savings there, instead of having to do a 3,700 receiver, you put that into another receiver. So 37 plus 1,500 savings at quarterback gets you up to 5,200. Who was 5,200 was Zay Flowers. And I really liked Zay Flowers. He was another one that I just didn't seem to fit and he went for over 40, and he was one of the receivers that were rostered in a lot of teams that made money. And so, even that alone, like if I hadn't gone Fields or Trask and done Armstrong instead and put that money and increased up from Hyatt to Flowers, I think you're looking at cashing lineups, especially in double ups. So that could have been a huge pivot. That alone could have been a big deal, a very big deal. And I just missed on Armstrong. I felt like the quarterbacks were worth paying for and just thought Armstrong's ceiling wasn't 37 points, really. I think that's the quarterback issue. That was my biggest issue. And I mean, just playing no Doege, just zero Doege would have been good. In a lot of tournaments, I ended up going with Harrison Bailey, who was only 4,500 for Tennessee. He was just so cheap, and Florida's defense is not very good. He actually started off pretty well, had a touchdown early in the game, and felt like, this was going to pay off. Ended up being really, really bad. Only had about 5 or 6 points, I think, total, which I don't care what your salary is. That's not going to cut it. And he killed a lot of tournament teams. We were talking low money tournament teams that, but I probably got a little too happy with Harrison Bailey, to be honest. Could have done some Will Howard, who was originally in there, or some Grossel. I mean, that guy really was excellent. And we knew the Virginia team could give up a ton of passing yards, and it happened. So, that late Jerkovich scratch kind of threw me for a loop. I didn't go straight to Grossel, which I should have, the straight backup. And that's where we landed. So quarterback was a little bit messy for me. And especially missing out on Armstrong was a pretty big deal. Running back, Kyren Williams, I faded him completely. That ended up being a good idea. Breece Hall, I faded. I just couldn't fit him. I mean, he's a great player. I love Breece Hall. Just kind of couldn't fit him in there. Probably would have been worth it because the middle range running backs did not do what I thought they could do. I think it would have been worth trying to find a way to get to Breece Hall. Again, you save that money at quarterback. You could have gone up from Goodson to Breece Hall, which I had a ton of Goodson. You could have gone up from Eric Gray. Of course, he was good, but you could have gone Eric Gray to Breece Hall. You could have gone from Spiller to Breece Hall with that savings, which would have all been good. I ended up loving the trio of Spiller, Goodson, and Eric Gray, and only Eric Gray had a game worth mentioning. The other guy, Goodson, was useless basically from fantasy in a pristine matchup against Illinois. Don't know what happened really. They threw a couple touchdown passes, which is unexpected for Iowa. And he never got around to getting in the end zone or really getting fed. In a really excellent matchup for 7,400. I mean, I felt like that was a great situation. But again, so whether or not you funneled it into receiver or you funneled that savings at quarterback going down to Armstrong and funneled it into getting to Breece Hall, that would have been much better use of your funds. Horvath, Master Teague, didn't want any of them, and they didn't really do much. Gibbs was a scratch. Letty Brown did not do much. Let's see. Austin Jones, we talked about. He got in the end zone twice. Didn't get to 100 yards or anything, he did get to 100 yards, I believe. So he actually was a great play. Just shied away from him. Again, really got infatuated with that trio of Spiller, Goodson, and Gray and tried to cram one of those guys. And then I did drop down. And a huge deal was Bijan Robinson, who was originally on my list as a $5,700 running back I really liked with Ingram out. Had a lot of Bijan Robinson. And I read a couple of things online about Jalen Berger. Looked into him. The volume seemed comparable. And I thought that Wisconsin would have a lot of success in a controlled game against Indiana, who didn't have their starting quarterback. Wow, that was way wrong. Berger was pretty much a killer. You got 15 carries or so, which is kind of what I expected, but then didn't do much with them. Meanwhile, Robinson had the game that you dream of. He was absolutely phenomenal, the game that you're hoping for. And I did have some, but I ended up going probably 60 or 70% Berger and the other Robinson and the teams that needed a running back at the, that $5,700-$5,800 price point. Big mistake. I mean, I had conviction on Robinson. I wanted to play Robinson and talked myself into Berger being safer, basically. And, that was a mistake too. I wish I would have just said, it's Robinson week. I mean, I had no way to know he was going to be that good, obviously, but I wish I would have at least done 50-50. Could have been a difference in a couple of spots, but ended up having a lot more Berger, and that was a huge mistake. But I just felt like Berger was safer. And I can't really explain why. Just kind of one of those things that I wasn't disciplined in, and just ended up flip-flopping, basically Friday night, Saturday morning to going a lot more Berger in those lineups that needed a running back in that price point. Okay, another player that I had no interest in was Trey Sermon for Ohio State. He bailed everyone who rostered him out with like a 75-yard touchdown run sometime in the second half. And he was really popular based on, compared to what I would have thought. I didn't even think about the second string running back for Ohio State after Master Teague had definitely established himself. And he was like 20% rostered. 20% for Trey Sermon. I guess the thought was it would be a blowout and he might get run in the second half, but I don't do that usually, because even if it happens, you're looking at 10 carries for 50, 60 yards. Maybe you get in the zone. That guy's not going to pop off. It's some savings, but even the ceiling isn't there because he's not going to play all game. And you're hoping the game flow goes how you want it to go, et cetera, et cetera. But wow, I had nothing to do with Trey Sermon. He bailed everyone out with a really long run that did start him. But 20% just seems so high for a guy like that. And it paid off for those that did it. But I had there was no rationale there for me to roster a guy like that. So kudos to those that saw that coming. Great for you. All right. So wide receiver, big miss was Garrett Wilson versus Chris Olave. We talked about both on the show. I really talked myself into the Garrett Wilson week. He had been thoroughly dominant. Loved the matchup. Turned out to be Chris Olave. He had a huge game. And originally, I had a lot more Olave with Wilson, especially I had Wilson kind of as a one-off when I went some lower quarterbacks. And then when I was doing field stacks, I was stacking him with Olave for the savings. And man, as the week went on, I just was like, I need all Wilson. He's the best receiver on the slate. He's worth the $8,800 price tag. He's the safest, most surest receiver. It turns out it was Olave this week. 10 catches, 160 yards or something, and a touchdown, at least one touchdown. Wilson apparently could have had two. I missed the play, but he had a 60-yarder or something called back. He ended up with a touchdown himself. He just didn't go off and didn't really make value based on the $8,800. Ended up not doing a lot of Kyle Pitts. He was fine, had close to 100 yards or 100 yards, but didn't get in the end zone this week. So that was good to fade him at 7,800. David Bell was sensational, 7,500. I talked myself into a lot of Rondale Moore, who ended up being good, but didn't get into the end zone. David Bell had 2 touchdowns and including a very long one. So he went crazy. And again, with the Ohio State receivers, I talked myself in the higher priced one, and he busted compared to his other receiver. And then in the Purdue is the exact opposite. I talked myself into the cheaper one, and the more expensive one went crazy. Sometimes that's just the way it goes. Those passing games were set up for success and just missed the guy, 50-50 coin flip, missed the guy. And there you have it. Kadarius Toney ended up actually with a decent amount of Toney. He felt like the guy who was best chance to go over 100 yards in the Gator passing game, and he did. He had a touchdown. Great game. Good choice, 6,700. Not good enough compared to everything else that I made mistakes on, but that was good. the NC State receivers just didn't do enough. I mean, like I said, that passing game didn't have a touchdown. I liked them both a lot. Thomas and Emzy had a lot of Emzy at 4,900. He was like decent. I mean, the receptions and yardage were what you expected. I just figured a touchdown was probable. Zay Flowers, 5,200. We talked about him, number one receiver on Boston College. The passing game looked good, and I just didn't have enough. I mean, ended up 5,200 was kind of a weird price point for me. Had a couple, just not enough. And then, I definitely wasn't trying to force him in, especially once Jerkovich was out. Wesley Wright didn't do enough for West Virginia, had him paired with Dogie. That passing game was just horrible. And then Josh Palmer, Jalen Hyatt for Tennessee ended up just I had so much exposure to Jalen Hyatt. 3,700 allowed me to get to those quarterbacks that I wanted to get to. And he just didn't, I knew it was risky. I just kind of talked myself into being probably less risky than I thought. Turns out the value was tough this week. And normally there is a receiver in the 3,000s or the low fours that I feel real comfortable with. And there wasn't this week. Michigan State had two guys at 4,500 and 4,300 that I kind of liked. And that, man, they were horrible. The passing game was just not good. And so that ended up being bad choices too. Turns out you couldn't pay, I think, for two really expensive quarterbacks. And if you went running back, you needed Jones or Bijan Robinson, and even Deuce Vaughn turned out to be pretty good. I had one of him, but he had two touchdowns. He ended up being good. So I was too obsessed, I think, with Trask and Fields. Even though they performed, Armstrong allowed you to not need them. And then didn't have enough of the right lesser quarterbacks. Plummer was fine. I had too much Dogie, too much Hockman, and too much Bailey in the end. But those were all tournaments. But you add them all together, it's probably just way too much exposure to Harrison Bailey. And another guy who I just wasn't in on was Desmond Jackson for Oklahoma State, who played against Texas Christian. I'm just not going to play a lot of people against TCU. That defense is nasty. That defense is limits volume. The team plays slow, and it's just almost a total I'm not interested. And he was in the sixes. I mean, when we played Desmond Jackson 2 weeks ago, he was in the threes, and it was like he doesn't need to do hardly anything to be exciting. But then, he was in the sixes this week, and I wasn't interested against TCU. He ended up being almost 50 or 60% rostered. Everybody was in on him, even though his price went way up. I just thought the value was gone. And he produced. He had well over 100 yards. He got in the end zone, which, they fed him 29 carries, and he produced. Not super efficient, but he got it done. And I had zero. The value just didn't seem there for me hardly at all, especially in that matchup. It didn't stop a lot of people, and they succeeded. They had a good play there. So you could have easily done, Robinson and Jackson and saved a ton. The three running backs I really liked didn't do anything except Eric Gray, who had a pretty good game. So that was a huge miss for me. And, when you miss, that's one thing. But when you miss and it's a guy that everyone else has and he hits, really tough. So, Flowers, Jackson, Armstrong were both over 30% rostered. And Jackson was almost 50%. So those were three guys I did not have nearly enough of. Two I didn't have any of in Armstrong and Jackson, and everybody else was on them. So that was clearly completely missed by me to not even consider them. And, when everyone else has those guys, that's bad news. So we'll run it back next week. We're going to keep doing this. We got a couple, at least one more week, I think, of the regular season. We're going to do this all through bowl season. I hope you stick with me. And I am putting my real stuff up every week. So, this is certainly not just hot air. I'm trying to win. I'm trying to help you guys win by breaking this all down. But obviously we make mistakes, and that's what happened this week. And so until next time, this was the review of week 14. We're going to do it again in week 15. Look for the show to drop on Thursday once the slate is out, and we'll see you guys on the flip flop.